G'day, Scotty here. There was an announcement in the past 7 to 10 days about Australian super funds investing in the US markets, specifically stock shares, etc., etc. But pretty much it can be all sorts of things like, well, we've heard stories of billboards for advertising and all sorts of weird and wacky stuff that goes on in investments. That got me thinking about a couple of things and, well, hopefully got you thinking as well. But the numbers they're talking is pretty large, right? And I wrote them down here, so I tried to get them wrong. So currently we've got around 785 billion Australian dollars value in the US in terms of our super fund money invested in the US. That's looking to increase over the next 10 years to 2.2 trillion Australian dollars. That's T, not M or B. It's T, $2.2 trillion. So that's a large increase, you could say. And especially considering that our super scheme, let's call it, was designed about 40 years ago. So in 40 years, we've got under 800 billion in the US for investment. But over the next 10 years, we're going to increase that to 2.2 trillion. That's a really large jump. Now, it kind of got me thinking that if you don't want your investments in the US for whatever reason, and I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't, I'm just saying it's pretty large number to think that that's a lot of coin over there. Now, if you don't want your investments in the US, then you need to do something about it. You need to talk to your super fund and see if you can choose where you can put your money in your super fund, actually take a bit more of an active role about what you're investing in your super fund. Yes, you can do that. If you've got a self-managed super fund, it's probably not as much of a big deal as long as you know where you're investing your money through managed funds. That needs to be thought of. But especially if you've got industry super, and a big portion of them are investing over in the US, that's what this is about. The thing is, I started looking for videos on this announcement and I couldn't really find much. There was lots of written information and there was a White House release about after the meeting with Big Bad Albo on this sort of thing with all the AUKUS stuff and all that stuff he went over there to do. And of course, what would you call it? Ruddgate that happened at the time when Rudd was in the room. That was fun and probably worthy of its own little special edition. But I did find this video from February on the 7:30 report. So we can take a look at that now. And it's just a short part of the video because it was about a whole bunch of Australian super funds going over to the US to, I guess, pitch this idea. So let's take a look.
It sounds like something from a DC comic, The Super Summit.
Welcome to this inaugural Australian Superannuation Summit.
Well, it's not from DC Comics, but it was in DC, in Washington, and...
All right. Well, so it's the first Super Summit, and after the first Super Summit, 8 months later, we're upping our investment by, $1.4 trillion. But, nothing to see here, except if you are watching the screen, and we will put a link to the full video in the link attached to the description on this video for the 7:30 report video. It does, to me, look like a who's who of the Labor Party politician, the ex-Labor Party politician list, when you start flicking through some of the shots at who is attending this summit. So just keep that in the back of your mind.
In DC, in Washington,
Mr.
and
Swan.
powerful men and women in suits did feature prominently.
We represent millions of working people and trillions of dollars.
This embassy-organised super session is scheduled for 4 days, showcasing Australia's long-term contributions to the US economy through retirement funds. With a delegate of Australian fund managers and business bigwigs chasing capital in the capital.
Around 40 years ago, Australia established a national retirement system called
The
superannuation.
Americans were shown a short video explaining what super actually is.
Super for us.
And super for the US. Let's partner
And supercharge
America.
Okay. Wow. If that's not propaganda, I don't know what is. So super for us and super for the US, which is also spelt us. Wow, someone got paid big to do that marketing spiel. And we'll supercharge things together. We'll supercharge the US together because, well, let's face it, you've worked your whole life hard, putting money aside out of every paycheck so you can supercharge the US. That's exactly what you're doing with your industry super in its super fund, supercharging the US. So I don't suppose anyone's asking why your money is supercharging the US and maybe not, I don't know, repairing the pothole outside your driveway, or maybe making it so Australia Post could deliver more than 2 days a week for a postage system, or insert any other Australian need here through infrastructure development and benefits to our community. But instead, I think we should benefit the US, because what better place for your super dollars to go and spend their time than the US? Because we all know that we love just putting our money over there. In fact, we love visiting there. Look, some people love visiting there. I've gone to the US on numerous occasions. It's great, but it's always better to come home. And I would suggest that if you live in Australia, it's because you don't live in the US. That was a huge lot of logic I just used there.
I think the impression has been incredibly positive. It's been a great opportunity to clarify just the degree of exposure and investment that Australian superannuation funds have in the US today.
David Anderson is the Chief Executive of Australian Retirement Trust. 1/3 of its portfolio is already invested in the US.
Well, right now, Australian superannuation funds have invested about $640 billion into United States assets. And we're forecasting that to grow as an industry to about $1.6 trillion over the next 10 years.
So there's a couple of things to note for what he said there. Firstly, the figures. I actually suspect he's using US dollar figures. Because it sounds like a lesser amount, because they're not lining up with any of the figures I got. In fact, they're more closely aligned to slightly more than the US dollar amount. So I had 517 billion US dollars, and he's saying, I think he said 640 already invested, and 1.6 trillion, if that is US dollars, that's getting up there. Do the exchange rate on that, we'll be over the 2.2. The other thing that he mentioned as well is that they already had 30% of their investment portfolio in the US. Now, it should go without saying that the US is obviously one of, if not the largest investment opportunities market in the world. And I'm not trying to say the US is a bad bet. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that if you build your portfolio for investment, and say you had money outside of super, 100,000, 200, 50,000, whatever, and you built an investment portfolio in shares. Now, would you build that all in the Australian stock market? Is that wise to do? I'm not giving you financial planning advice. I'm just saying that would you consider 1/3 of all your investment money, you had 100,000 and you put 30,000 into US stocks or US investments, is that something you'd be comfortable doing? If it is, then great. Maybe you find it's too low. Maybe you want 100% over in the US. I don't really know. Only you can answer that. What I'm trying to get you to think about is that you need to think about your super like it's your money, and how would you like it handled, and where would you like it invested? Because those are the questions that you need to be asking yourself after looking at some of these videos and these news releases that have come out this week.
Years.
And despite uncertainties around the effects of the new president's changing economic policies, the super sector still considers the US a safe bet.
Australia only represents 2% of the world's global GDP. The current pension pool far exceeds Australia's annual GDP. It is bigger than the total market cap of the Australian Stock Exchange. So to a large degree, we've completely outgrown Australia. So we have to look offshore for ongoing investment opportunities.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers made a guest appearance.
From capital markets to critical minerals, from trade to technology, manufacturing and infrastructure. This summit is, above all, really about stronger returns and stronger economic ties.
But he wasn't in Washington to strictly talk super, with bigger economic problems just up the road.
All right, he goes on, I think, to talk about tariffs and stuff. So let's just focus on the super at the moment. Old matey before him was talking about the fact that as investors or investment companies, we've outgrown the Australian economy because it's larger than the super pool is now larger than the Australian Stock Exchange in terms of value. You know, that's interesting. So if we think about that, that means that if you cashed all that in, you'd be able to buy every company on the stock exchange. Well, a large portion would be owned by super funds. If you cashed everything in, then that would cause a big run. It would go backwards. So it's kind of a lot of this pool of, promises of growth and hot air, which is probably a topic for another day. But let's just go with the fact that obviously that makes us, by a percentage, a hugely wealthy country in the world, and a per capita investment number. I think we're the largest per capita investors in the US. So we're not the largest investors in the US. Obviously, there's China and others that have a lot more money there than Australia. But as a per capita, we are the largest investors in the US at the moment, and that's a pretty big number. So we should be aware of that. All I'm trying to get you to think about by watching this video and watching out for news releases and press releases is what's happening with your super, because it's your money. If you love the idea of your super being invested in the US and perhaps want to do more of that, then choose the funds that you can choose within your super environment to do that. If, however, you don't like that idea and you want to choose a different type of investment, well, then do that as well. I'm not telling you what you should or shouldn't do, other than you should know what your super is invested in, and you should be happy about how it's invested there. I'm Scotty North. I'll see you next time.